is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane. The final 2 chapters, Major Wizardries and Time Heart. In these chapters, guys, this is really sad. I definitely was reading this and eating at the table and crying into my plate. And I just think overall I was unprepared for how emotional doing Spoil Me would be overall. Thanks to Tristen for sponsoring this episode that made me cry. Welcome to Spoil Me. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. I am Natasha, and today in the chat on Crowdcast, Tristen is the only person here, the sponsor of the episode, and Tristen just wrote, Fred, sad face, yeah, guys, Fred. You thought the Lotus was bad. So, this section is banana pants. Like, the only thing about this section that bugged me a little that I wished got addressed that doesn't really is once they get back to New York and everything begins to hit the fan there, that we don't get any description on how people are reacting. We hear about sirens eventually, that the police are coming, but we never see other human beings interacting or reacting to these trees coming alive and cars assaulting and, statues running around like they're living things. And that is the only thing that I was really missing out on, was I wanted to see what people saw, if they saw it at all. There's so little explained about that it's not clear to me if people are even completely able to tell if it's magic that's super obvious that there's no denying what it is, or if it's magic that is sort of invisible to people who aren't wizards, except for the effects of it. For example, there's talk of later on somebody dug up parts of Central Park or blew up parts of things there. So there's talk of the after effects. But there isn't talk of what people, we don't hear anybody talking about, oh yeah, we saw statues running around. We don't hear anybody talking about, trees moving and walking through the earth like it's water. It's just the kind of thing that I, as somebody who is not a wizard and is reading this, can't help but put myself in the position of everybody on the sidelines and what I would be thinking and what I would do and how I would react. So the fact that isn't really addressed at all was really surprising to me, because I expected at least a little something, especially because, as we find out later, the sun going out is something that was noted. That was definitely, people are aware that happened. So yeah, it's just kind of a weird distinction that's drawn by the author between the events themselves and the effects of the event and what people are able to notice. So I'm curious if that's something that remains in place later in the books, if there are other books where people do see effects of things, or do if there is a mass panic, because this is Manhattan. This is the biggest city in the world. And if people are all saying they all saw statues running around like they were alive, there's going to have to be hundreds and hundreds of witnesses minimum. Thousands more likely, because they're coming from really far away. So that feels like it would change the way the world works a little bit if there are a ton of people who swear that they saw this, and if there's physical evidence left behind that may have happened. Are there hoof prints in the concrete and stuff? These are the questions that I ask. So it's not really relevant to the story itself and the plot. So I get to a degree why it was left out, but it adds a lot of flavor and a lot of like extra tension and stakes, knowing that other people might be getting inadvertently involved in this. Anyway, so let's talk about what actually happens. I left off the last section right in the middle of the escape from the other world. And they are in the middle of running across this chasm on a sword that Kit made out of his what do you call it? Antenna thingy. What do you call it? But yeah, I really like this whole thing killed me a little bit because she's crossing it and I thought that it was going to be like the air bridge, and we find out pretty quickly that it is not. This was worse than the bridge of air had been, for that hadn't flexed so terribly under each step she or Kit took. His steps threw her off balance until she halted long enough to take a deep breath and step in time with him. Listen, I don't understand my own body's reaction to reading that, but it wasn't good. Like, the idea of it swaying, and every time he steps, so like she winds up kind of depending on the pattern that he's choosing in order to keep herself from falling, which like takes away such a huge element of control from it that everybody who listens to the show for any length of time knows that control is key for me. I am a big control freak. And when you start to take away controlling aspects of storylines, that is where I start to just lose my shit. So yeah, she is like manages to make it all the way across, but she's in pretty bad shape by the time she gets there, understandably. And then they have to like pelt to the world gate, which it turns out is like on the fucking train tracks. And there is a train heading for them as Kit is trying to read this spell. And Nita she's like wanting to help him, but she just kind of has to stand by and like hope that he can get through it. And as he's in the middle of reading, the power of the Star Snuffer like descends over them, and they almost they almost don't make it through this world gate. It's a pretty intense moment, to be honest. I'm trying to find the exact spot where this starts because it's just, here it is. That was when the Star Snuffer's power came down on them. It seemed impossible that the dank, close darkness in which they stood could become any darker, but it did, as an oppressive blanket of clutching, choking hatred fell over them, blanketing everything. The Rowan Rod's silver fire was smothered. Fred's light went out as if he had been stepped on. Kit stopped reading, struggled for breath. Nita tried to resist, tried to find air, couldn't, collapsed to her knees, choking. The breeze from the dark at the end of the tunnel got stronger, the onrushing train pushing the air in front of it right up the track, right at them. "I will not," Fred said, struggling, angry. "I will not go out." His determination was good for a brief flare, like a match being struck. Kit found his voice, managed to get out a couple more words of the spell, and Fred's wavering radiance grew stronger, managed a few more. Nita found that she could breathe again. She clutched the Rowan wand, thinking with all her might of the night Leaves said had given to her, the clear moonlight shining down between the branches. The wand came alive again. Shadows that had edged forward from the walls of the tunnel fled again. Kit read, hurrying. 2/3 done, Nita thought. If he can just finish. So, yeah, that is a pretty intense moment. And like, finally, they get through the world gate just as the train's passing them. And I love the detail about how as the train's bearing down on them, it's like it has this expression of delight at the, anticipating the feel of blood beneath its wheels. Good God, guys. That's really intense. So they managed to get through the world gate. And here I'm thinking like, oh, okay, that's going to be the end of the book, the escape from this like bad wizard. And then we're going to set up for the next book. I was very wrong. Oh, I was so wrong. Sweet summer Natasha. So he can't close the world gate. And they have to run because he will catch them and kill them because they have the book and he wants it. But also, if they run, he's going to follow them through the city to wherever they have run to, which is a lot of responsibility to know that you're leading this thing into your world. And the more you try and get away, the more havoc he's going to wreak and leave in his wake. Which that's just, that's a lot for these poor kids. I feel bad for them. So they flee to Central Park, and there's all of this detail about like how everything seems so normal on the streets and everything seems so normal in the building as they take the elevator down compared to the previous world when they had to take the elevator. But they know how quickly this could all change, and yet everybody around them is just blissfully unaware of the danger at the moment. And they get to the ground level and they're running and they look up and they can see him coming through the world gate, like at the top of this, which there goes a moment that I would love to see on screen. Like, a lot of this book is very cinematic, but that in particular, the idea of it, you leave a door open in the air, hundreds and hundreds of feet in the air, and you're down in the city looking up at this thing coming through a like wormhole essentially, and nobody else knows that it's there. But if they all just looked up, they could see it. Maybe. I'm assuming that, but I'm not sure of that because we don't really find out. That there's something really creepy about something that is not actually invisible to everyone. I want to believe that people could see him, and that, it just happens to be that the placement of the world gate makes this all like a little bit more difficult for him, maybe. But it keeps everybody else from it keeps everyone else in ignorance for a little longer, because if that world gate had been where it was meant to be, which was in the back of that deli, so much of this would have gone differently, right? Like, I didn't want to think about it, to be honest. So let's move right along. And then as they're running, they're thinking about the fact that they are probably going to have to read from the Bright Book. And both of them are really afraid of doing this. Like, the discussion that they had with Tom is just ringing in their ears that he is hoping he would never have to do that. And here they are, a couple of kids, 13 years old, and they are going to have to take on something that a full-grown adult who has a lot of experience, who has been doing this so long that he's like in the business of selling time. They don't even want to do this. So, yeah, the whole thing is just so... So they're heading into, Tristan's saying maybe it was high up on purpose. Yeah, I was thinking because, it was supposed to be in the other place. So it feels like somebody did that on purpose. And I have no idea how that could work. I don't know if the kids, we find out later that some of what has wound up happening is due to their own interference with time. So is that what it is? Or, is there somebody else keeping an eye on things, like trying to help where they can? I don't know how world gates, how their locations in whatever world they're in are determined. So I would be very curious about that. So they are arguing over who's going to read from the Bright Book. And it's interesting because they both don't want to do it, but they both feel like they can't not do it because that's just kind of dishonorable. So they're each trying to fight the other that, no, I will do it. No, I'll do it. And in the end, they wind up having to toss a coin. And it's Kit that has to read. And Nita seems distinctly upset by that. And it turns out she has a right to be. What winds up happening to Kit is so strange. And I'm really curious if there are going to be like any lasting effects from that, because I don't feel like that's something that just winds up going away. But I have no idea what effects that, like what that looks like. Would it be just having more power than they had before? I mean, it seems like they had a pretty good amount of power, all things considered. But they also were in possession of the book when they did some of the more amazing stuff here. So maybe some of the lasting effect would be being able to do that kind of magic without being in possession of the book anymore. All right, so here, all right, they're talking, they're running. Fred is so excited about the stars, and the sun is here too. I don't care that it's on the other side of this silly place. I can feel. His thought cut off so abruptly that Nita and Kit both stopped and glanced over their shoulders. A coldness grabbed Nita's heart and wrung it. The sky, even though clear, did have a faint golden glow to it, city light scattering from smog, and against that glow, high up atop the Pan Am building, a form, half unstarred night and half black iron, glowered down at them like a statue from a dauntingly high pedestal. Nita and Kit froze like moths pinned to a card as the remote, clear howl of Perrytons wound through the air. And then he starts to call darkness, and it begins to flow down the sides of the building. Where the darkness passed, metal tarnished, glass filmed over or shattered, lighted windows went quenched, went blind. Down all the sides of the building it flowed, black lava, burning the brightness out of everything it touched. So they have to run. And they managed to team up with the trees and, like I said, the statues, and buy some time, because they realize that there's probably a spell in the Bright Book that they can read that will help, but that it's really going to take some time, and that's what they don't have right now, is that he's going to be on them and they won't have any time to finish. So what they have to do is essentially ask all of these trees to sacrifice themselves for the sake of time, which is a pretty brutal thing already, and we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. So the trees gather around them in this like protective circle that forms a palisade, and Kit is reading the spell, and he's reading a spell that like, and this, I was so glad that this is what the book acknowledges as well, because I was sort of feeling the same, like at the moment, the same way. So he says the Mason's word really, really loudly, basically screams it, in order to get as many statues as can hear him involved in the fight. But then, once it's time for him to read the book, it is, as it's written, it's like he is defining the, what do you call it? The reality of the city, and like calling to all of the different buildings and the streets and like the makeup of the actual infrastructure, for lack of a better word, of the city. And it's helpful in that things are starting to fall apart. So being reminded of what they are, as we've read earlier in this book, is important. But it's not addressing what's actually happening. It's only addressing the symptom of this star snuffer being there. So it may help make things look like they're not so terrible, but it's all really an illusion unless you can fix this dude who's constantly working against you. And the minute you stop saying the spell, it's all going to start to degrade again. I should address, before I get too much further into that there's a moment where Nita's reading the spell for the trees. And I like the way this is worded. She read the spell, or tried to. She saw the words, the syllables, and spoke the speech, but the moonfire falling on the book ran through her veins, slid down her throat, and turned the words to song more subtle than she had ever dreamed of, burned behind her eyes, and showed her another time, when another will had voiced these words for the first time and called the trees to battle. Which is a pretty intense thing. I'm curious who was the first one to read this. So yeah, all of these trees start to approach them and, like I said, form a palisade around me. Around them. You hear that? So then comes, "Don't hog it." She looked over at him and was amazed to see him regarding her with some of the same worry she was feeling. "I won't," Kit said. "You'll take it away from me and keep reading if..." He stopped, not knowing what might happen. Nita nodded. "Fred," she said, "we may need a diversion, but save yourself till the last minute." "I will. Kit," the spark of light hung close to him for a moment. "Be careful." So, suddenly, without warning, every tree around them shuddered as if violently struck. Nita could hear them crying out in silent anguish, and cried out in terror herself as she felt what they felt. A great numbing cold that smote at the heart like an axe. Kit, beside her, sat frozen with it, aghast. Fred went dim with shock. "Not again," he said, his voice faint and horrified. "Not here, where there's so much life." "The sun," Nita whispered. "He put out the sun." "Nita, how long do we have?" 8 minutes, maybe a little more for light to get here from the sun. 8 minutes before it runs out." So yeah, they can't read the book to do the spell if there's no sunlight providing moonlight to shine onto the book. Well, that's fucking, like, really devious. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll just snuff out the fucking sun, and then you won't be able to read it. It's like if, you know, it's basically no different than somebody breaking into your house and cutting the power so that you can't see where they're coming at you. That's brutal. I was so mad about this, and like, what a thing to do in our world. Can you imagine? This is the kind of thing that in the Dark Ages when, you know, there would be, what do you call it? Eclipses, that people would, like, think it was the end of the world, because honestly, the sun is gone. The end. Game over. We are done. Like, I don't know how long we could possibly get by. I'd be curious to, like, hear theories on that, how long any sort of warmth would make it. And we could generate our own heat with, like, you know, fossil fuels and whatnot, but there's no more solar powering anything, which would be, you know, fossil fuels are nearly at an end. I suppose we could use wind, but you're not growing anything unless you have grow lights. I just can't imagine what in the fuck the world would look like if just the sun went out. That is a kind of a fascinating, like, premise for a science fiction novel, like some sort of, I'm sure there's probably one out there of, you know, something post-apocalyptic with, yeah, well, you know, the sun went out. Now what? And there has to be so many considerations of all the different things that would change as a result of that. Never mind the fact that, like, you know, human beings, we produce vitamin D in response to sunlight, and we also have seasonal affective disorder. A lot of people do when there's not as much sunlight. So we would be fucking miserable. Like, they'd have to build artificial beaches for people to go and sun themselves under lights in order to keep our moods up. I have no idea. Devin says, "Can you imagine the debates after this was all over?" The debates, you mean like just people debating what had actually happened? I don't even want to think about it, because that's the sort of thing that Alex Jones would have a fucking field day with. So anyway, the moon is, the book's covers were fading, going clear, burning with that eye-searing transparency that Nita had seen about Kit and herself before. The whole book was hardly to be seen except for its printing, which burned in its own fashion, supremely black and clear, but glistening as if the ink with which the characters were printed had moonlight trapped in them too. So this is when he starts to read the... Kit was invoking New York, calling it up as one might call up a spirit, and obedient to the summons, it came. And there's a lot of descriptions that are pretty beautiful. The skyline came, unsmirched by any blackness, a crown of glittering towers in a smoky sunrise, all stabbing points and jeweled windows, precipices of steel and stone. City Hall came, brooding over its colonnades, gazing down in weary interest at the people who came and went and governed the island through it. The streets came, hot, dirty, crowded, but flowing with voices and traffic and people, bright lifeblood surging through concrete arteries. The parks came, settling into place one by one as they were described, free of the darkness under the night, from tiny paved vest pocket niches to the lake-set expanses of Central Park, and they all came thrusting the black fog back. So this is really beautiful, and it made me feel a little bit better, but underneath my comfort at all of this was this feeling of, this doesn't feel right, though. This doesn't feel like the thing. And as he's reading, Nita could see Kit start to burn with that same unbearable clarity, become more real, so much so that he was not needing to be visible anymore. Slowly, subtly, the book's vivid transparency was taking him too. And Nita's like, we said that I would take the book away from him, but I don't know what, like, if this is enough to warrant doing that, because he seems like he's getting stronger, if anything. So she's sort of doubting herself. And let's see, then metal began to smash on stone in a thunderous canter right across the street, and with a horrible screeching neigh, the rider's iron steeds smashed into the tree wall, splintering wood, bowing the palisade inward. Bowing, probably, huh? And then she hears other heavy hoofbeats. He has a twin brother, Nita thought. We are dead. But the hoofbeats divided around the battered circle of trees and poured past in a storm of metal and stone, the riders and steeds marble pale or bronze dark, every equestrian statue in or near Central Park gathered together into an impossible cavalry that charged right past Nita and Kit and Fred and into the street to give battle. Peritons and cabs screamed as General Sherman from Grand Army Plaza crashed in among them with sword raised, closely followed by Joan of Arc in her armor, and Simone Bolivar, and General San Martin right behind King Vladislav was here in medieval scale mail, galloping on a knight's armored charger. Don Quixote was there, urging poor broken-down Rocinante to something faster than a stumble, and shouting threats against the whole breed of sorcerers. Teddy Roosevelt was there, cracking off shot after shot at the cabs as his huge horse stamped them into the pavement. El Cid Campeador rode there, his bannered lance striking down one Periton after another. Behind all these came a wild assortment of creatures pouring past the tree circle and into the street. Eagles, bears, huge dogs, a hunting cat, a crowd of doughboys from the First World War with bayoneted rifles, all the most warlike of the nearby statuary, even some not so warlike, such as several deer and the ugly duckling. From down Fifth Avenue came striding golden Prometheus from his pedestal in Rockefeller Center, bearing the fire he brought for mortals and using it in bolt after bolt to melt down cabs where they stood. Yo! Talk about cinematic. How amazing would that be to watch? That would be so much fun. I would love that. So, Kit, by the way, is still growing more and more transparent and brighter. And this is, she yanks the book out of his hand, and she bends her head to read, and an undertow of blinding power and irresistible light poured into her, over her, drowned her deep. She couldn't fight it. She didn't want to. Nita understood now the clear burning transfiguration of Kit's small, plain human face and body, for it was not the wizard who read the book. It was the other way around. The silent power that had written the book reached through it now and read what life had written in her body and soul. Joys, hopes, fears, and failings all together. Then took her intent and read that too, turning it into fact. She was turning the bright pages without even thinking about it, finding the place in the book that spoke of creation and rebellion and war among the stars. And so she begins to read, and as she does, Like, it feels like her voice is sort of echoing out, even though it's not actually literally loud enough to, it's resounding in this way. And as she's reading, the Star Stuffer screams, "No!" because he can tell what's happening. But Nita felt no fear. It was as it had been in the beginning. All his nose had never been able to stand against life's "I am." I love that line so much, guys. I love it. I love it so much. All around her, trees and stone and flesh and metal burned with the power that burned her. Self-awareness, which death can seem to stop, but can never keep from happening, no matter how hard it tries. "Where will you go? To what place will you wander?" she asked sorrowfully, or life asked through her, hoping that the lost one might at last be convinced to come back to his allegiance. Of all creatures alive and otherwise, he had been, and still was, one of the mightiest. If only his stubborn anger would break. His power could be as great for light as for darkness. But it could not happen. If after all these weary eons he still had not realized the hopelessness of his position, that everywhere he went life was there before him. Still she tried, the ancient words speaking her solemnly. "In vale or on hilltop, I am there." And this goes out on until she's mid-sentence and the moon goes out, and all of a sudden she can't read the book anymore. All right. Tasha's about to get emotional on camera. Everybody buckle up. "Now," Fred said suddenly, "now I understand what all that emitting was practiced for. No beta, no gamma, no microwave or upper wavelength ultraviolet or x-rays. Is that all?" "Fred?" Kit said, but Fred didn't wait. He shot upward, blazing. A point of light. Guys, I can't even read it. A point of light like a star falling the wrong way up and up, until his brightness was as faint as one more unremarkable star. "Fred, where are you going?" "To create a diversion," his thought came back, getting fainter and fainter. "Nita, Kit." They could catch no more clear thoughts, only a great wash of sorrow and loss, a touch of fear, and then brightness intolerable erupted in the sky, as Fred threw his claudication open, emitting all his mass at once, as energy blowing his quanta. He could hardly have been more than halfway to the moon, for a second or two later it was alight again, a blazing, searing full moon such as no one had ever seen. There was no looking at either Fred's blast of light or at the moon that lit the trees and statues in the astounded face of the Star Snuffer with a light like a silver sun. The rider spent no more than a moment being astounded. Immediately he lifted his steel rod, pointing it at Fred this time, shouting in the speech cold words that were a curse on all light everywhere, from the time's beginning to its end. But Fred burned on, more fiercely if possible. Evidently, not even the Star Snuffer could quickly put out a white hole that was liberating all the bound-up energy of 5 or 6 blue-white giant stars at once. "Nita! Nita! Read!" Kit shouted at her. Through her tears she looked down at the book again and picked up where she had left off. The Dark Rider was cursing them in all earnest now, knowing another 3 lines in the book would bring Nita to his name. She had only to pronounce it to cast him out in the unformed void beyond the universes, where he had been cast the first time those words were spoken. So, guys, this kills me. Nita fell down into the bright power once more, crying but reading in urgent haste so as not to waste the light Fred was giving himself to become. And Kit winds up joining in with her as she is reading. She couldn't stop crying, and the power burned in her tears too, an odd hot feeling, as she cried bitterly for Fred, for Kit's Lotus, for everything horrible that had happened all that day. All the fair things skewed, all the beauty twisted by the dark lone power watching on his steed. If only there were some way he could be otherwise if he wanted to. For here was his name, a long, splendid flow of syllables in the speech, wild and courageous in its own way, and it said that he had not always been so hostile, that he got tired sometimes of being wicked, but his pride and his fear of being ridiculed would never let him stop. Some toxic masculinity right there, guys. Never, forever, said the symbol at the very end of his name, the closed circle that binds spells into an unbreakable cycle, and it indicates lives bound the same way. And then Nita remembers what Peach said, don't be afraid to make corrections. And she pulls out her fucking pen. Y'all, when I tell you I hollered, her fucking pen. I can't. There's something so hilarious about this. Oh my God. The metal still tingled against her skin. The ink at the point still glittered oddly, the same glitter as the ink with which the bright book was written. Nina bent quickly over the book, and with the pen, in lines of light, drew from that final circle an arrow pointing upward, the way out. The symbol that said change could happen. If, only if. And together they finished the Star Snuffer's name in the speech, said the new last syllable, made it real. You guys, that was deep. Just like, just telling somebody there's a way out, you know? A mess. Oh my God. That is just a lot. What the fuck? I wasn't ready for this. And they they understand what a fucking unfair situation this is for him. Like, they feel bad for him. Even though in some ways it's a self-created cycle. Nevertheless, he's trapped. And that's part of it, right? That's what people do to themselves. They trap themselves and then believe that's just the way it is. This has always been this way, and that's just not true. But you forget that. And her drawing this arrow is just like trying to open a door and show him you don't have to. There is a way. If you want to make a way out, you can do it. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to take work, and it's going to be potentially like really uncomfortable, and you will have to put aside some things that you have held on to forever, which is always scary. But you can. It's just, how much do you want to? Do you really want to? Oh my God. You know, like, especially in the climate that we're in now, this is the kind of thing that's like what I feel like people who have write articles trying to explain some of the situations that marginalized groups are in, this is what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to like create a door and show people, you think this, it's not real. Here's the door. And the thing is though, that you can only do that. You can only make the like outline of a door, and they have to decide that, oh yeah, that's a door. And they have to decide to open it. So that's all you can do, which is really tough, but it's also huge. Like, you can't lead someone through it. You can't make them go through it. But if they don't know the door is there at all, then that's just hopeless. So it seems like a really small thing, but it's the most important thing. Ugh. Guys, this was really a lot. So So, the wind was gone. Fearfully, Nita and Kit turned around, looked at Fifth Avenue, and found it empty. The creeping blackness was gone with the breaking of its master's magic and the sealing of the world gate he had held open. Silent and somber, the statues stood among the bodies of the slain, crushed cabs and peritons, which I'm really curious about the peritons, because I sort of pictured the peritons as being like beings of like energy and like impressions, but not having actual corporeal bodies, and I'm really curious what that looks like. The howl of sirens, lost for a while in the wind that had risen, now grew loud again. So, some 93 million miles away, the sun had come quietly back to life. But its light would not reach Earth for another 8 minutes yet, and as Nita and Kit watched, slowly the new star in the heavens faded, and the moon faded with it. From daylight brilliance to silver fire to steely gray glow to earthlight shimmer to nothing. The star went yellow and red and died. Nothing was left but a stunning sky-wide aurora, great curtains and rays of rainbow light shivering and crackling all across the golden glowing city night. He forgot the high-energy radiation again, Kit said, tears constricting his voice to a whisper. Ugh. Guys. It's too much. It's too much in this last chapter. You think he'll take the chance? She said. I don't know. Kit shook his head unhappily. Old habits die hard. If he wants to. Old habits do fucking die hard, man. You are not wrong. And this is more than old habits. This is eons old habits. So they managed to like skip out without getting, because nobody thinks that these kids have anything to do with anything, you know, understandably. Nita bent to pick up a lone broken off twig off an oak and stared at it sorrowfully. There wasn't even anything left of him, she said. Only the light, Kit said, looking up at the aurora. Even that was fading now. So they go and get back up to the top of the building, because that's where they're going to do the time spell to jump back. And this was such a lovely little idea that never even occurred to me. I love it. I loved it. All right. Nita gulped for control as she remembered Fred's words of just this morning, an eternity ago. And this was what being a wizard was about, keeping terrible things from happening even when it hurt. Not just power, or control of what ordinary people couldn't control, or delight in being able to make strange things happen. Those were side effects, not the reason, not the purpose. She could give it up, she realized suddenly. In the recovery of the bright book, she and Kit had more than repaid the energy invested in their training. If they chose to lay the art aside, if she did, no one would say a word. She would be left in peace. Magic does not live in the unwilling soul. Yet never to hear a tree talk again, or a stone, or a star. Yeah, that's a pretty cool moment, though, because she decides, like, no, I'm definitely not going to be able to give this up. Like, this is part of who I am now. But I do like the fact that she considers, like, being like, I don't know if I want this. Which, yeah, you would consider that, wouldn't you, after that fucking day you just had? I mean, that's something that I feel like doesn't get addressed enough, is the option of maybe just walking away from a talent that you have that brings nothing but heartache all the time. Like, there are plenty of storylines about superheroes who are like, well, I don't like this power and I don't want, but like this is something that I feel like is in a whole different category, because it's so, the scales are so much bigger than like, oh, I have to stop this person who's trying to like run a drug ring in Hell's Kitchen or something. Like, this is the actual fate of the universe, that's a lot to have on your shoulders. Like, that's so much that if you stop and really think about it at any point, you're going to lose it, right? That's just, it's too much. So yeah, I could see really, like, I get very impatient with superhero stories where it's like, oh, I didn't want this, I didn't ask for this, and like, oh God, whatever. Even though, really, if I were in their situation, I'd probably feel the same way. But this is one of those where I'm just like, yeah, guys, you know what? Maybe you should. Like, maybe you should just not do this anymore. So they start the spell to jump back, and I think, what time was it supposed to be? It was supposed to be like 10:45, I think. But they jump back and it's 9:45. And they realize that the book made the spell work a little bit too well. And they're not even, their other selves in the past have not even yet reached the roof. So they were supposed to come back like right after the two of them had gone through the gate. But they did not manage that. So the noise that they hear when they are first arriving in New York and coming up to the roof is themselves having returned from the future, throwing a battery at the door to like keep them from coming outside too quickly, and buying themselves some time to actually like go. I think they wind up like jumping ahead a little bit more. Something happens. I'm trying to find, what do? They buy time. Oh, to hide. That's right. And they watch them like, you know, go into, onto the, what do you call it? Air bridge. Although I'm curious because the periton comes at them from like inside the door. Doesn't it like come from downstairs or something? And they go through the door and downstairs for the shuttle. And the train home is the end of the chapter. But they don't run into the periton, or is it supposed to be that he can't be out of that world because everything still happens. I'm a little confused about that. Am I wrong, guys? Did the periton not come up through the door? I thought it did. I thought it like bent the door as it came through. It might be a spoiler. I don't know. But maybe they leave long enough before the periton, like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, getting too wrapped up in details that probably don't matter. So they walk home, and I like the description of the walk home, that there isn't like a sense of you know, there's no victory to this. Like I feel like it would be really tempting to write them both as being maybe kind of pumped after everything, but they're both exhausted and like barely talk to each other on the way home. And it's just a kind of a like anticlimactic end of the day thing. And I had forgotten, Devin saying when the Peritons showed up, they came through the door, but the door was like a portal, I believe. So they actually weren't coming from inside, if that makes sense. Oh, okay. Huh. I wonder how that works. Interesting. I had thought that the Peritons, like my theory at the beginning of the book when they first go through, was that obviously the gates being in a different place than they were due to construction, and then the Periton coming up and like driving them through the gates. I had thought all of this was the work of like, you know, some baddie who is trying to force them to do some things. But now I'm like, is this all the plan of some goody who is trying to get them into a place where they can like help. Because they would not have gone through the World Gate the way that they did if not for the pertinent. Like, she would have ducked through, gotten her pen, and come right out again because her pen was right there. She might have been able to just reach through, for all I know. The pertinent forced them through and kept them from wanting to go right back home again. As you know, but yeah, that's an interesting question. All right, so maybe there's somebody else at work here. So there's a moment. Kit jumped up on the sidewalk on the other side and headed south toward his place. Nita crossed east, watching Kit as she went. Though the look on his face was tired and sad, all the rest of his body wore the posture of someone who'd been through so much fear that fear no longer frightened him. Why is he so afraid of getting beat up, Nita thought. Nobody in their right mind would mess with him. In mid-step, she stopped, watching him walk away. How about that? How about that he got what he asked for? After a second, she started walking home again. The weight at her back suddenly reminded her of something. Kit, she called silently, what about the book? Hang on to it, he answered. We'll give it to the advisories or they'll know what to do with it. Right, see you later. And here comes a really interesting moment. Nita was so tired that it took 3 or 4 minutes before the identity of the blonde person walking up East Clinton toward her registered at all. By then, Joanne was within yelling distance, but she didn't yell at Nina at all, much to Nita's surprise. This was such an odd development that Nita looked at Joanne carefully as they got closer, something she had never done before. There was something familiar about Joanne today, a look that Nita couldn't quite pin down, and then she recognized the expression and let out a tired, unhappy breath. The look was less marked, less violent and terrible than that of the pride-frozen misery of the Dark Rider, but there all the same. The angry fear was there, too. The terror of what had been until now no threat, but was now out of control. The look of the rider about to be cast out by a power he had thought himself safe from. The look of a bully whose victim suddenly wasn't a victim anymore. Nita slowed down and stopped where she was in the middle of the sidewalk, watching Joanne. Even he can be different now, she thought, her heart beating fast. But that was partly because we gave him the chance. She stood there, watching Joanne slow down warily as she got close to Nita. Well, Joanne said, her voice full of anger and uncertainty. I don't know what to say to her. We have absolutely nothing in common, Nita thought frantically. But it has to start somewhere. She swallowed and did her best to look Joanne in the eye calmly and not in threat. Come on over to my place after supper sometime and look through my telescope, she said. I'll show you Jupiter's moons. Or Mars. Joanne made that old, familiar, haughty face and brushed past Nita and away. Why would I ever want to go to your house? You don't even have a widescreen TV. Nita stood still, listening to Joanne's footsteps hurrying away a little faster every second, and slowly began to realize that she'd gotten what she asked for, too. The ability to break the cycle of anger and loneliness, not necessarily for others, but at least for herself. It wouldn't even take a speech. Plain words would do it. And the magic of reaching out. It would take a long time, much longer than something simple like breaking the walls between the worlds, and it would cost more effort than even the reading of the Book of Night with Moon. But it would be worth it, and eventually it would work. A spell always works. Nita went home. Guys, that's a lot. It wouldn't even take the speech. Plain words would do it, and the magic of reaching out. It would take a long time, and it would cost more effort than even reading the book, but it would be worth it, and eventually it would work. Yo! Let me get another tissue here, y'all, because, you know what I'm saying? That's just... I don't know how to cope with all this hopefulness. I don't know how to do it. Devin says it must be the new edition Mindset Color TV. Oh, that is fun. I love little weird details like that. I love it. So she goes out that night after dinner, and feels the sun go out. Okay, real talk. Them going back in time, I had forgotten that they go back and just go home. And they let their other selves carry on with everything. They don't go back and try to undo any of it. Because there's, like, why, how could you? So, like, I had just sort of assumed they go back in time and it's as if none of this ever happened. Nope. It all totally happens. I was just like, I had my head in a total other place, you know? And she watches the moon go out and is leaning against the trunk of a tree while this is all happening, like hearing the trees flipping out a little bit again and trying to say, like, it's okay, it's going to be okay, because she knows that, but, like, Jesus. And then the sudden new star in the heavens etched every leaf's shadow sharp against the ground and set the moon on fire. Nita squinted up at the pinpoint of brilliance, unwilling to look away, though her eyes leaked tears of pain. She'd thought that afternoon that living through the loss a second time would be easier. She was wrong. The tears kept falling long after the star went out, and the moon found its light again, and the wind died to a whisper. She stopped crying long enough to go back inside and go to bed, and she was sure she would start again immediately, but she was wrong about that too. Exhaustion beat down grief so fast that she was asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, under which she had hidden the Book of Night with Moon. And then we go into her dream. She is in, like, this impossible area of Manhattan that doesn't really exist. And Kit is there with her. And there's this really bizarre moment. They turned their backs on the towers and the traffic and the laughter and looked out across the shining water toward Brooklyn and Long Island. Neither was there just then. Probably someone else in Time Heart was using them, and Kit and Nita didn't need them at the moment. What a weird... I have no idea how that works. The silver expanse of the Atlantic shifted and glittered from their feet to the radiant horizon, endless. And then here comes the Lotus and Fred. Do you know, I normally find, like, dreams where somebody who has died is that, like, I find this kind of thing so trite and frustrating and annoying, but I did not feel that way at all about this. Probably because Time Heart's been established a little bit already at the beginning of the book, even though we don't know what it is, even though there's not, like, detail about the section that she reads on it. The fact that I know that Time Heart is a thing already, and I accept that this can happen there, it doesn't feel cheap and shitty. It doesn't feel goofy either. It's just kind of sweet and wonderful. So Nita asks Fred, is it confusing being dead? Not very. So they have the book with them in this dream, and they give it to the Lotus. And Nita asks Fred, has he changed? And Fred makes a spatter of light, a gesture that felt like the shake of a head. Not changed, just made otherwise, as if he'd been that way from the beginning. He has back the option he'd decided was lost. To put aside his anger, to build instead of damn. Then if he uses that option, you mean every place could be like this someday? Possibly. What he did remains. Entropy's still there. And death. They look like waste and horror to us now, but if he chooses to have them be a blessing on the worlds instead of anger's curse, who knows where those gates will lead then? That's such an interesting idea. Like, okay, yeah, death and entropy will still have to exist, but if he decides that he doesn't want them to be a bleak terror that sort of, like, ruins things for everyone, what does that make them? It's a really good question. So the Lotus takes the Book of Night with Moon in his jaws and jumps in the water and goes away. And she asks Fred just before he disappears, did we do right? Go find out, he said. Nita turned around to lean on the railing again, and after a moment Kit turned with her. They breathed out, relaxing, and settled back to gaze at the city transfigured, the city preserved at the heart of time, as all things loved are preserved in the hearts that care for them. Gazed up into the radiance, the life, the light unending, the light. And she wakes up and everything is okay. She did right. And her sister's there teasing her about how she has a boyfriend. The sun went out last night. You should see it. It was on the news. And somebody blew up Central Park. And Kit Rodriguez calls. He wants you to call him back. How come you keep calling each other anyhow? Halfway out the bedroom door, realization dawned in her sister's eyes. Ma, Nita's got a boyfriend. The wizard threw her pillow at her sister, got up, and went to breakfast. The end. It doesn't say the end, but it is. I did not read the next. There's a preview chapter for like the next book, and I did not read that. Guys, though, this was so much. Like, I just wasn't ready. And like Time Heart being like where things are preserved perfectly because you love them. For those who are listening and not watching, every time there's a long pause in this, it's because I'm trying not to cry again into the microphone. Ugh. It's too beautiful. It's just really beautiful. And like in a very sincere way, not in a preachy way or in a way that feels trite or easy or, you know, like I'm trying to teach you all a lesson. It does not feel that way. Ugh! Trying to snap out of it so that I can wrap this sucker up. So Tristen and Devin are both in the chat here, and you are both the ones that commission every single chapter of this book. Thank you both so much. I really loved it. Super good. Do you have any questions for me before I wrap it up? And I don't know if y'all are planning, I don't know, you know, how things progress, if the rest of the books you feel are worth covering, and if you guys are going to be doing those or what, but even if you don't, like, this one book was it feels like a complete story, you know? It doesn't feel like it needs to be there's plenty more to dig into as a writer from here, of course, but it feels like its own story. So, Devin says, it's kind of crazy how much she packed into this book. You're welcome, and thank you so much for doing this, and I definitely will be. Oh, cool. And you're welcome, and thank you. It's just really nice to get exposed to a lot of literature that I wouldn't otherwise be, because for the book club, it's hard for me to pick up, like, people want me to cover a whole series, and I can't really do that for the book club. It's not how it works. I need to do one-offs. But there's so many series out there, and I can't possibly just do a regular, like, unspoiled feed for everything. Plus, it's, like, tough to commit yourself when you're not sure how many people will even listen to your shows. Like, when I put out free material on iTunes, I'm doing it with the hope that this will draw new people to becoming patrons on Patreon. And that is something that you need to, like, appeal to as big of an audience as you can, hence doing things like Harry Potter and Song of Ice and Fire, and soon Doctor Who. But these other series, it's not that they're unworthy of being covered, it's just that the time investment, like, I needed a guarantee that I was at least going to be able to make a living. And so doing this commission thing is just the perfect solution, you know? Like, I'm able to make a living off what I'm doing, and you guys get coverage of exactly what you want. And I know that the audience is also already there because you are the audience and you're asking for it. So I'm really glad I started to do this. And, like, part of me is like, I wish I'd started this ages ago, but I think it's the right time. I think if I had started it, I'm only just starting to really figure out how to manage my schedule and how to set all of this up. And I don't think I could have done it, a year ago. So Tristen says, I've loved this whole experience. Me too, Tristen, even though I cried on camera a bunch. Devin says, it's like I said at the beginning, I wanted something heart healthy, and this series definitely fits the bill. It really does. And it's just, it makes you stop and ask yourself questions. And, like, this is something that, and again, with the climate that we are in and a lot of marginalized people, being attacked in a way that they haven't outright been attacked in so long. All of these aggressions that we've been experiencing have always been there, but it's so much more out in the open lately. And it makes it so much more apparent to a lot of people who previously were able to turn a blind eye to it. So in some ways, I don't want to say that's good, but there is something to be said for people deciding that they're not going to be secretive anymore about the way that they feel about certain communities. But then you get to this point where if you are explaining over and over and over and over and over again to people who are stuck in a cycle of constant fear and judgment why certain groups of people simply deserve to be treated like human beings, you start to get so resentful of having to do this over and over and over and over and over again that you start to be like, you know what, fuck you, I'm not explaining, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's a lot of energy, you're not listening, I'm done. And I still, don't get me wrong, I think that's 100% valid, and I definitely still employ that sort of method a lot of the time. But I think there is a gut feeling that you can have when you're talking to somebody that you know might actually be hearing you. And it might not be evident that they've heard you in the moment, but those kinds of conversations can kind of like worm their way in, and they keep thinking about it, and it starts a process of them opening up the door. And I had that happen a couple years ago. A friend, it was a guy friend of mine who he's a great dude. I really like him, but he made a really gross rape joke. And him and I got into a fight, like a sincere fight over his joking and me being like, this is so not okay. And him being like, it's a joke. What the fuck? You can't have a sense of humor. And I kept at it with him when I don't think I would have with anybody else. And about a year and a half later, he DM'd me and was like, hey, just so you know, I've started to like see some things around and read more, and I'm starting to understand and realize that what I did really wasn't okay. And like, thank you for standing up to me and saying something about it, because it got me thinking and more receptive to other things. And that's like the whole thing, right? It's just knowing like when to pick your battles. That's really hard, because if you try and open the door for everybody, it's totally exhausting, and people aren't always talking to you in good faith and listening and willing to listen. And you have to develop a sense for knowing when it's in good faith and when they're just wasting your time and trying to bait you because they find it entertaining. And that's tricky. And it's really tricky online, which is why so many people sink time into these arguments online, because it's like the tone and everything can be really lost. It still can work, but I feel like it's harder to tell if it's worthwhile. So this is the kind of thing that I need reminders sometimes that like, while communication can feel like it doesn't work, it really does. It's just, it has to be timed well. It's all so dependent on so many details and so many like the frame of mind that the person is in when they are talking to you, because somebody might not be receptive one day, but would be another. And it's just really tricky, you know? So anyway, and you know, this goes, obviously this whole idea of like a cycle of behavior and not feeling like you can get out of it applies to like way more than just these social issues that I'm talking about. It also applies to things like dealing with trauma or addiction, or there's like so many things. But that's just what came to my mind immediately, because there's an element of like emotional labor to it, to what they did, that I feel like is very relevant right now to a lot of people. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for commissioning this. Really do appreciate it. And I can't recommend enough that you guys read this. Like, I've read so much of it out loud, but it's still like, you guys should read it. You really should. It's a lot. I think you'll like it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. So you want to be a wizard? I do want to be a wizard. Thanks everybody so much for listening, for commissioning, and for coming to the chats. And hopefully I'll see you soon with the next book. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.